just wanted to say a quick thank you to Alex for arranging this. I think today, in today's climate, by the way, I'm taking over for my dad, if you don't know, can't tell. But in today's climate, I think it's important to learn about our history and understand it properly so we can know how to deal with it and deal with times. So a big thank you on behalf of the community to Alex for arranging this. And I'm sure there are some new people here. I don't know. I don't recognize everyone. It could be you guys have been here before. If you're new, welcome. It's nice to see you, nice to meet you, and hope we'll see you guys again at the future. And Chabad, doors are always open, as those of you who are here know. So, l'chaim, we'll see you.
Okay, thank you. Sure. Okay. Right, exactly. So I just want to welcome all of you. So welcome everyone to Chabad of the Rivertowns. I'm Alec Roberts. Of course, I'd like to thank the Silvermans, Rabbi Benji and Levi and Levi Levitin, who's the assistant rabbi, for hosting this for us. In September of 2022, my son Ben and I went to Israel. We did an extensive trip, visiting a lot of villages and towns on the border of Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza. And we noticed something unusual. There were these small concrete structures everywhere. They were brightly painted, as this was one, which was near the border with Gaza. And we wondered what they were. They looked like sunglass huts, you know? But it couldn't be a sunglass hut, we figured, because there's just too many of them. Even a children's playground slide, we noticed, was reinforced concrete and not plastic, which kind of seemed odd. It's then that we found out that they were actually bomb shelters, because anyone who lives in Israel can have as little as 10 seconds after a siren sounds to find refuge from a rocket. In fact, we basically learned that Israel is the only, what's that? Oh, you want to hold it up? Sorry about that. Israel is the only country in the world where the building code since 1992 requires a reinforced concrete safe room in every residence. Think about that, how people are forced to live like that, for 75 years. This is just one small example of the unique conditions under which Jews have existed for thousands of years. And yet they have not just existed, they have actually thrived and outlasted all of the great empires, providing breakthroughs in medicine, science, the arts, and business far out of proportion to their numbers. They've won 22% of Nobel Prizes, which is 110 times their proportion, which is just 0.2% of the world's population. They are the most hated and admired minority at the same time. Tonight we will hear evidence from an internationally recognized historian and author that the extraordinary success, tragedy, contributions to humanity, and anti-Semitism are not just accidents, but can be traced to a biblical covenant with Abraham made thousands of years ago as described in the Torah. Rabbi Ken Spiro grew up in New Rochelle, where his parents still live.
No, they live in Israel.
In Israel, right. And then he made Aliyah to Israel 45 years ago, correct? Okay.
Close.
He's a historian and not a theologian. He's the author of Crash Course in Jewish History, World Perfect, and Destiny, Why a Tiny Nation Plays a Huge Role in History. Ben and I engaged him as our guide to the old city of Jerusalem and David City, and he was terrific, fantastic. The fundamental Jewish belief in a God active in history remains a stretch for many of us. But Rabbi Spiro argues that repeating patterns over thousands of years make a compelling case that Jewish history has a director and a storyline. His story. It is my pleasure to introduce Ken Spiro.
There you go. Hi, good evening, everyone. This is the first stop on my tour. I'll be here a while. But my brain is still in Israel time. So if you see me nodding off in the middle, applaud loudly, I'll wake up. And I want to thank Alex for bringing me in. Very nice to be back, and thank Chabad of Dobbsbury for having me in what used to be a church, obviously. I used to go to Young Israel in New Rochelle, which was also a church, so I'm used to the architecture. Just to add a few more details about my background, I was born in Brooklyn. Anyone from Brooklyn here? Hold on, okay. But I grew up in New Rochelle, New York. I grew up in a non-observant home. My kids, who were all raised religious and speak Hebrew as their first language, that's pretty cool. First people in 2,000 years in my family who can say that. My son asked me many years ago, he said, Dad, like, what does that mean, like you weren't religious? What did you used to do Jewish when you were little? And I said, on Passover, we used to have ham and cheese on matzah. And he said, Dad, like, why'd you bother with the matzah? I said, it was Passover. We couldn't have bread. I went to public school, New Rochelle High School. I went to Vassar undergrad. I studied Russian language and literature and Japanese in college because I wanted to do international business. I already met a bunch of Russian speakers here. Those were the hot languages like 1,000 years ago. Today it would be Spanish and Mandarin. And when I got out of college, I could read Tolstoy's War and Peace in the original Russian, but I couldn't ask for directions on a street. Because if you want to actually speak a language, what do you have to do? You got to live there. You want to learn Spanish, go to Florida. So I decided before I go to grad school, I'm going to take a year off, get a break, go half a year as a graduate student to the University of Moscow. And then, because I had a half a year to kill, I'm going to go to Israel. I never went to Israel. I went to college BC before cell phones, before birthright. So I said, I'm going to go to kibbutz and pick grapefruits with Danish girls and work on my suntan. So when I went off to Russia, and we have some people who are actually born in the former Soviet Union, when it was the Soviet Union, it was illegal for a Jew to even own a book in Hebrew. You get arrested for trying to study or practice Judaism. The first thing I learned is if you want to get a Jew to do something, just tell them they can't. If the Congress, God forbid, would outlaw Judaism, every Jew would be in Chabad and everywhere else, running around secretly learning and having Friday night dinners. So I spent 6 months cutting my classes and hanging out with hundreds of young Russian Jews who were literally risking their lives to be Jewish. And I said, there's got to be more to this Jewish stuff. So instead of going to kibbutz, I checked into a place in the old city, Aish HaTorah. Maybe some of you have been to the new Aish building, which didn't exist when I got there 1,000 years ago. I was going to stay for 3 months. I stayed a little longer. I'm now 8 months and 42 years in Israel. And I studied full-time in yeshiva. Then I got smicha. I'm a rabbi. I don't have a congregation. My mother told me it wasn't a great job for a Jewish boy, so I got a master's degree in history. I'm also a historian, speaker, licensed tour guide in Israel, and author. And I mix up my time. Not a lot of tour guiding going on in Israel. It's been a rough 4 years, between 2 years of COVID, 1 year in the middle, and now what happened a little over a year ago, not a lot of guiding going on. But what there is a lot of interest. And on October 7th, a year ago, we all got a bucket of ice water thrown in our face. Those of us living in Israel, it was, and I've lived through a lot of wars, a lot of missiles, but that was unprecedented, horrifying. And even around the world, there was an explosion of anti-Semitism. Within a few hours of what happened on October 7th, they're already at the Sydney Opera House screaming gas the Jews. We hadn't even responded yet. So everyone is really open and interested, and I created this presentation literally to try and frame what's going on because it can be a little overwhelming. So this is kind of like my greatest hits. It covers a lot of information. Anyone knows how I speak, I'm Mr. Information. So it really is going to go through like what's going on. Let's get the big picture. How's everything interconnected? So before we go into it's a PowerPoint, as you can see. I apologize for the TV screen. It's a little small. There's some seats in the front and people having trouble seeing in the back. The front's the best place to sit, by the way. Anyone who publicly speaks knows you never look at the person sitting in the front row. I'm always looking at the back. So in the comedy club, you don't want to sit here, but but if anyone wants to sit, you're welcome to move up. But anyway, it's a PowerPoint. If people have questions, if you don't mind, hold them till the end. I'll be happy to take any questions and give people my contact information. But before we jump into this whole end of days, getting the climax at the end of history, first I have to do a disclaimer. I do not know when redemption is arriving. Hopefully soon. I don't have the date of the Messiah. If I did, I would be a prophet. Now, as a prophet, I wouldn't be standing here talking. I would be working in Wall Street. But before we go to the future, we have to talk a little about the past. And we have to first appreciate that we Jews brought a radically transformative idea into the world, which is basically what? What's the most radically transformative idea the Jews brought into the world? You know, we have gilt, bagels, junk bonds, leverage buyouts, Einstein, Marx, Freud. Alex mentioned 22% of all the Nobel Prizes since 1901. It's actually 11,500% more than we should have. But all that stuff aside, the biggest Jewish impact we've had is the idea of one God. And one God has been an incredibly transformative idea in human history. First of all, out of the idea of one God comes a concept what we understand about God, even though we really can't because he's infinite, but we like to define God as like the creator, sustainer, and supervisor. He knows and controls everything. It's the concept called determinism, that there are no accidents. And one God also, as you saw in the first image, is the most transformative idea in terms of morality, ethics, liberal democracy. I literally have multiple presentations on liberal democracy is an outgrowth of Judeo-Christian values, which are really Jewish values that have crept into the world over a very long period of time. But this idea of determinism is fascinating because it means we're not just like in a story that never ends and randomly stumbling through with no beginning, no end, and no point. History is a controlled process leading to a destination. We have somewhere to go. And before we talk about where we're going, let's do a little bit of the previous episode stuff. You know, like you watch these TV series, previous episodes, they give you the synopsis. So just to go back to the beginning and do some Jewish worldview, with the word in Hebrew is called hashkafa. It's how we look at the world. It's our basic software operating package for how we Jews understand the world. So Jewish worldview begins with some very basic points. If we go to episode 1, which we just started recently, we just started the yearly cycle of reading the Torah again with the creation narrative, but we start with this whole notion of Jewish time. When does it start? So time starts on day 1 of creation, but we don't start keeping time until day 6 of that creation story. What happens on day 6? Who knows the story? What happens on day 6? The creation of man. Oh my God, you guys are so not politically correct. Wrong pronouns. I went to Vassar. It was like it used to be Yale sister school. They're very feminist there. They used to say things like, when God created man, she was only joking. Or what did God say when she created man? I can do better than that. The women can use those jokes at a different time. But the creation of human beings, what's the lesson we learn from the fact that time doesn't start then, we start keeping time from day 6? Huge Jewish worldview lesson number 1 is that the focus of creation is us. The focus of creation is us. Okay, the focus of creation might be us, but what's the purpose of creation? This is the biggest question there is. I ask this question to thousands of people a year. It's interesting, by the way, I have an Orthodox audience in front of me, Orthodox Jews. They all give me one of 2 answers, which are what? Actually, the men and women slightly varied. Almost all the women in the audience will say, we're here to serve God. And the men almost all the men will say, we're here to learn Torah and do mitzvahs. So first of all, I have a whole class in depth on this topic, which we're not going to go into now. But you can't serve God. He's infinite. He doesn't need anything from us. It's a lopsided relationship. He can give us everything. We can't give him anything. But not only that, Torah and mitzvot, don't get me wrong, that's the rocket fuel, the guidance system, the payload of Judaism. There is no Jewish people and there's no reality without it, but it's a means to an ends. Judaism teaches, you ready for this? This is going to be a shock to a lot of people. The purpose of creation is pleasure. Now, when Jews hear that, they're like, no, that's not Judaism. Judaism's guilt, neuroses, what I can eat, what I can't eat, what did I do wrong, why am I a doctor, where's the grandchildren? We're confused because we think the opposite of pain is pleasure. It's actually not true. The opposite of pain is no pain, which is comfort. Pain and pleasure go together like we say in sports. No pain, no gain. The more you work for something, the more meaningful it is. And there, by the way, many different levels of pleasure in this world. I'm giving you the super dumbed down version of a very profound work by, for those of you in the back, you need binoculars to see it. But it's one of the greatest Jewish thinkers of the last 500 years, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. With a name like that, you know he's Italian. But he wrote a book called Mesilat Yesharim, The Path of the Just. And he says, behold, what our sages of blessed memory have taught us is that man was created solely to delight in God and derive pleasure in the radiance of the Shekhinah, which is the divine presence. For this is the true delight and the greatest pleasure that can possibly exist. By the way, a little side point, but any of you guys ever read these near-death experience books? Yeah. And no one actually dies. They don't get to the end but they all start out in the same place. What do they see? You have the out-of-body experience. You're floating above the body. But what does everyone say they see? It's universal. The light. And what does everyone say they feel? It's universal. An overwhelming feeling of love that is unimaginable. That's it. That's the infinite. This world, hiding behind this world. The word for world in Hebrew, by the way, is what? Olam. And the root of olam is ne'elam. It's hidden. God, remember the Wizard of Oz? Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. God hides behind, but the ultimate pleasure is experiencing God. There's lower level pleasures, like lowest level pleasure is physical pleasure. Then you have love and you have meaning, and the highest level pleasure, that's what it's all about. That's what the story of the Garden of Eden was about. That God puts us in this perfect environment where he takes care of everything. Everything's taken care of. And what do? Spend all our time, forget the carpool and the shopping and the cooking and the cleaning and none of that. Everything's taken care of, so we could spend all of our energy and all of our time doing what? As we say in 1960s slang, hanging out in the garden and grooving on the Shekhinah. Just enjoying God's presence. Why have ice cream when you can have transcendence? Should have been the shortest, most straightforward story. But if according to the pain is the pleasure and the highest level pleasure is relationship with God, what's the hardest thing to build and maintain in this world? Relationship with God. Everyone wants it. How do you know everyone wants it? Anywhere you go at any period of time in any place on the planet Earth, there is spirituality and religion because it's the deepest yearning of every human soul to want to know there's more than just this, to want the connection. But they don't want to work for it. And the early narrative in the Bible, which we just read very recently, the Noah's Ark story, is basically humanity saying, I want it, but it's hard to relate to an infinite invisible being. There's some seats up front if anyone wants to come here. But I see all the cool things God created that are really awe-inspiring, like the beautiful sunset and the stars, and I'll have a relationship with those as a way of indirectly having a relationship with God. What happened after a number of generations? People just forgot about God and ended up worshiping the forces in nature. They lost sight of, the big guy. What's that called in Hebrew? Avodah Zorah, idolatry, paganism, the worst thing you can do. By the way, not because you can hurt God. You can't help God, you can't hurt God, he's infinite, but to ignore him is to miss the whole purpose, the whole point of creation. Like we're wasting our time. But what's really cool, in the first book I wrote, which is called World Perfect, which I demonstrate, is there is the direct relationship between our relationship to the big guy upstairs and each other. This relationship falls apart, and then the relationship between human beings falls apart. And the world gets full of, what's the word used to describe what the world is full of before the flood story? Hamas. Isn't that wild? Which means lawlessness and violence. There's no accidents in this world. Like you wonder how that terrorist organization got their name. They probably called Feinstein, Schwartz, and Goldberg and Madison Avenue and said, can you give us the name of like a terrorist organization going to shoot missiles at innocent people and do horrible, unimaginably bad things? They said, maybe try Hamas. It's a great idea. So the world declines. We have the flood, which we read as a cute little fairy tale, but it's a very heavy story. God says, use the world correctly or lose it. He wipes out everyone, sparing only whom? Noah, hoping he'll do what? Get the world back up to relationship with God. Is Noah successful? No. He's righteous enough to save himself, but not proactive enough to save the world. By the way, that's a huge lesson for us. We have to always... Noah is not the model we need today. It's not enough to be safe. I'm in my community, I got my schools and my shul, my kosher food. Meanwhile, the Jewish people are like, basically disappearing outside. No, and the world is in big trouble, got to be proactive. But so the world continues to decline until we get to the Tower of Babel story. The whole world gets corrupt. Humanity unites, but for all the wrong reasons. What do we call that today? United Nations. The useless nothings. I'm all for closing the building down and giving it to the EU. You know the EU? What does the EU stand for? Asav United. Sorry, couldn't resist. No, seriously, they deserve each other. But it's the UN. If you think I'm being harsh on the UN, by the way, the UN has condemned Israel more than every other country in the world combined in the last 50 years. Do you know that? But back then, they unite to rebel against God. Look, just like it looks like game's over and God's thinking, forget the Big Bang, let's do the big crunch. Along comes one human being, and this is the ultimate power of one story. The ability of one person to change the whole course of human history. I hold this person as the greatest intellectual and idealist of all of human history. Who am I talking about? Avram Avinu. From where? Ur. Where's Ur? It's Iraq. We all know where Iraq is. Ambrose Bierce, who wrote during the American Civil War, has one of my favorite quotes. He said, war is God's way of teaching Americans geography. Most of the students in my class, they can't find like France on a map, but they can find Afghanistan. Anyway, and he's born, by the way, in the year 1948 from creation, which is really cool, because what was born in 1948 Christian calendar year? Israel. Okay. But out of Iraq comes one man who's great for two reasons. He's got the right stuff. This is what it says in Genesis about him. For I have known him, God says, that he will command his children and his household after him to keep the ways of Hashem, of God, by doing justice and righteousness. He is committed to the mission. He's got the right stuff. And I always say he's great for two reasons. One, in a world that has lost connection with God. Avraham is a radically transformative, free-thinking super genius who's able to think outside the box and connect to a completely counterintuitive, infinite, invisible being. But imagine being the only person in the world to believe in an idea which no one else could comprehend or accept, and a lot of people will kill you for even saying. How many of us with the chutzpah even whisper that to their best friends? Chutzpah, by the way, is such a Jewish word. Most non-Jews can't say it, you notice? They can't say simcha, they can't say chutzpah, and they can't say tuchas for sure. But what does chutzpah mean? Audacity, nerve, spunk, gumption. And Avram says, and this is this whole chosen people thing, which everyone knows about, but few people can articulate. One day, you're going to be walking down the street looking Jewish, you got your Jewish star, and you got your yidlid, and someone's going to say, you're Jewish? What do you think you are? What's chosen? Blah, blah, blah. So how do I explain chosen? I said, the simple explanation is Abraham says to God, God, I choose you. I choose to dedicate my life and the life of my children to one mission, to teaching the world about the reality of you and the values and the rules and the relationship that comes from having that relationship with you. And God says back to Abraham, you're choosing me, I choose you back. What are we chosen for? It's not for privilege, by the way. Maybe a privilege to be Jewish, but we're not chosen for privilege. We're chosen for responsibility. What's the responsibility? The word that the Jewish world loves to use is tikkun olam, fix the world, which is definitely a higher cause than save the whales. But the reality is this is taken out of context, this expression. It's used in the Aleinu prayer that we say when we pray it 3 times a day, and it comes from the expression litaken olam b'malchut shakai, to perfect the world under the kingdom of God. It's all about, but the real job of being Jewish, my friends, and this is a huge point which I believe is lost on even a lot of the Orthodox Jewish world, the real job of being Jewish is Kiddush Hashem. Kiddush Hashem. To live and act in a way that inspires other people. This is said so many times in the Bible. You can see in Leviticus, God spoke to Moses saying, speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, your God, am holy. And it says in Exodus 19, now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine. But you shall be for me mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, a nation of priests and a holy people. This is what it's really about. Isaiah says it the most beautifully. I, God, in my grace have summoned you and I have grasped you by the hand. I created you and appointed you a covenant of the people, a light to the nations. Our job is to live and act in a way that inspires other people. People are supposed to say to us, look at those Jews, look at how they live. They're nice people, how they raise their families. Look at their communities, how they do business. Look at that cute little country in the Middle East. What's their secret? It's not about converting or conquering, by the way. We make it hard to convert. And Jewish empires, conquering, what's the only Jewish empire in history? Hollywood. And it's definitely not a source of Jewish values. And if you saw the movie Oppenheimer, also the A-bomb. Okay, but seriously, it's to live and act in a way that inspires other people. So now we know what's going on. We have a different reality. We are, the way I like to say it is, I'll hear it. Remember that show, The Mod Squad? Those of us who are old enough remember The Mod Squad? It was a police show. They're really cool. We're the God Squad. That's our job. The connectors to humanity, the great-grandchildren of Abraham, whose job it is to bring humanity back to God. Okay. So now we have a plot rewrite. The original plot was supposed to be humanity hangs out in the garden building relationship with God, but they fumbled the ball, to use an NFL analogy. So now the new plot is humanity returns to God, Jewish people lead the way. So I said this years ago in a class, and a guy says, wait, Rabbi, time out. Like he said, how many people are in the world? What's the world's population today? 8 billion. He said, how many Jews are in the world? By the way, people think there are a lot more Jews in the world than there really are. Because we're spread out everywhere, we're disproportionately impactful, and we're very loud. But how many Jews are in the world? 15 million. What percentage of the world is Jewish? I'm not talking about in Brooklyn. It's half. 0.2% of the world is Jewish. So he said, Rabbi, you're telling me Jews aren't even 1% of the world's population, but that the plot of human history is humanity returns to God, Jewish people lead the way. Aren't you being like a little egocentric here and self-centered? First of all, I said, we Jews have never believed that reality is a popularity contest. Okay, it's not about who votes for what. Okay, but there's a great British, Lord Bolingbroke, who has a fantastic quote. He said, "History is philosophy teaching by examples." That's such a great idea. Think about it. You can theorize about anything. I always use an example. 100 years ago, a communist and a capitalist. Communism believed that human nature and economic trends would lead the world towards a worker's paradise. Let's run that through 100 years of human history. I have some people from the former Soviet Union here. They'll tell you how well that worked. Capitalism may be flawed in certain respects, but it works a heck of a lot better than communism, which is the most destructive, worst idea ever thought up in human history, in my opinion, that has led to the estimated death of 100 million people in the last century. So in keeping with the notion that history is philosophy teaching by examples, I said to this guy, you know what, I'm going to give you a couple of examples that clearly illustrate that we, the Jewish people, despite our teeny tiny size, play a totally outsized role in human history. And each of these examples could really be a class by themselves, but I'll just give you the very short version of it. Example number one that shows that we play an outsized role despite being 0.2% of the world's population is, I call it the infantry example. Anyone here do the military? I was in the Israeli army, but it was so long ago. Joshua was my commanding officer. My son-in-law, my son has been in Gaza 5 times. He just got out again. He was 120 days since last year. My son-in-law is 385 days in Gaza now. So I have 3 kids. My oldest son was a sniper and a medic in the paratroopers. My second oldest son was a combat medic in Golani. He's now in Bislach. His unit got the, you know who. Sinwar, yeah. He didn't do it himself, but they were there. My middle daughter was a combat medic in Karakol. My other twin girl was chief engineer in the Navy, whatever. But when we would go out on maneuvers, and all armies do this, not just the IDF, you go 2 by 2 with one guy in the front, like that guy over there. And the guy in the front is called, I once asked in an audience, and someone yells out from the back of the room, "Dead!" But what's the guy in the front called? What's he called? Point man, which is a position of tremendous responsibility. Why? Because he's leading the way. Everyone's relying on him. But it's also the greatest position of danger. Why? Because who's going to walk into the danger first? The minefield, the ambush, the enemy is going to be him. When humanity fumbled the ball and we picked up the world and ran with it, we became the point nation of history. And this, by the way, and I'm going to get to it later, but what I'm telling you now is the one true cause of all of anti-Semitism. I mean, we've been accused of a lot of stuff in human history. You guys study some anti-Semitism? Like we kidnap Christian babies, use their blood to bake matzah. We killed Jesus, we poison wells, we're in league with the devil. We control the world's economy and seismic activity and solar flares. We trigger tsunamis in Southeast Asia to drown Indonesia with tidal waves. Release sharks into the Red Sea to destroy Egyptian tourism. Send vultures to spy on Saudi Arabia. We stole Iran's cloud cover. We have a space laser. By the way, if anyone believed even 10% of this, no one would mess with us. Would you mess with people who control the world's economy, the animal kingdom, and have a space laser? But we're going to get to the real, we'll talk about the real cause later. But we are out in front. We get it first. When evil comes into the world, you can test it like gravity. Jews or the Jewish state will be the first target. We're going to talk about that more. But to go to the other example that illustrates we play an outsized role, despite the fact that evil's always targeting us, 0.2% of the world's population, the point people of history, is the Hollywood example. So in Hollywood, you have the actors are stacked at a pyramid. Remember who's the top? The smallest number of actors, but those are the leads, right? Below them are the supporting actors, the bit parts, and then you have the walk-ons, the extras. Everyone on the set is there for a reason. There's no one not on the movie set who's not supposed to be there. But that's in Hollywood. But what's the great thing about being the lead actors? The A-list, the Brad Pitts and the Tom Cruise and the Jennifer Lawrences and all those people. Why is that cool? You're famous, you make a ton of money, everyone loves you. What's the one downside of being that famous? There's one huge downside. Paparazzi. You have no private life. Everything you do is in People magazine, the National Enquirer. I travel a lot. I'm in way too many airports. Whenever I see someone with sunglasses and a baseball cap in an airport, I assume they must be like some person. I spotted a lot of actors and actresses over the years moving through airports, looking really obviously like they don't want to be seen. But that's in the fantasy world of Hollywood. When we, in the real story, his story, took upon ourselves this unique role, we became the lead actors. We don't get the fame and the fortune, but boy, do we get the paparazzi. And this was best stated by the late, great newspaper columnist Charles Krauthammer. Remember him? He was unbelievable. He had a great line, "Jews is news." And since good news is no news, only bad news makes news, when a Jew does something wrong, oh my God, or the Jewish state, even though it's like the only normal place in the Middle East, like little liberal, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, tolerant, developed, free market, startup nation surrounded by all these failed states with no rights of any kind that are falling apart and killing each other, no one cares what they do. But Israel, oh my God. Now, it's crazy stuff, but if what I'm saying is true, this is the way it has to be. Remember there used to be the old, for those of us, again, who are old enough, remember the old Hebrew National commercial with Uncle Sam, you know? It goes, Hebrew National, we have to answer to a higher authority. Take out Hebrew National. I see everyone above a certain age is nodding their head. It's like, what's he talking about? Take out Hebrew National and put in Hebrew Nation. You have one of the greatest truisms of what being Jewish is about, which was stated best by the great non-Jewish prophet Bilam, who you can read about in the book of Numbers. He was hired to curse us, but out of his mouth comes one of the greatest statements about what being Jewish is about. He says, Himham devadad yishkon, they're a nation that dwells alone, is not reckoned amongst the nations. Being Jewish might not be comfortable, but it's always meaningful, and the world is always going to remind us, you Jewish people, you Jewish state, we have to answer to a higher authority. So it's really supernatural. But if supernatural and weird happens to you every day, what does it become? Normal. That's the biggest problem of being Jewish. What's weird what everyone else would think is so wild and so weird for us is like, sure, everyone's going to pick on us. Sure, we're going to be disproportionately impactful. Sure this, sure that. And all these things contradict each other. But we don't have the ability to step outside ourselves and look. Now, David Ben-Gurion, by the way, he had a great line. The first prime minister of Israel, he said, in Israel, in order to be a realist, you must believe in miracles. And trust me, my friends, if you're sitting in this room today Jewish, 3,700 years after, 3,338 years since Mount Sinai, by the way, and you're still around, having outlasted everyone who's mostly tried to kill us, we have no idea how supernatural everything in our history is. That we go into exile for 2,000 years and reestablish our state, like everyone's saying now. The Jews are the only people who are still living back in the same country, with the same language, with the same faith, with the same capital city. No one else does that, but we don't get it. So just to maybe pull back a little before we continue into the future now, I learned a long time ago that when you want to say things about Jews, don't have Jews say things about Jews. Like David Ben-Gurion, he's Jewish, but have non-Jews say it. Because when a non-Jew says it, oh, now it must be important. Now it must be true. When a Jew says it, you can't believe it, especially if it's a rabbi saying it. So I have collected so many quotes of non-Jews talking about Jews, and they're the ones who are looking from the outside at us and our history. The highs and the lows, the crazy roller coaster ride that is our history is so weird and so supernatural that anyone with the breath to see the history, standing outside and comparing it to anyone else's history, sees how utterly crazy it is. So here's a great example. Now, most of you won't be able to see the quote back there, but this is Alexander Hamilton. You know him. He's got the musical named after him. Progress of the Jews from their earliest history to the present time has been an entirely out of the ordinary course of human affairs. Boom, beautiful. Is it not fair conclusion that the cause also is an extraordinary one? In other words, that it is the effect of some great providential plan. Perfect. Nails it. 100% correct. Here's another great quote. This is Thomas Newton, Bishop of Bristol. Great quote from the 18th century. The preservation of the Jew is really one of the most single and illustrious acts of divine providence. And what but a supernatural power could have preserved them in such a manner as none other nation upon earth hath been preserved? Just as the fact that they're around. This just doesn't make sense. This is a quote I love. This is Nikolai Berdyaev, who's a Soviet-era historical philosopher. He says, the survival of the Jews, their resistance to destruction, their endurance under absolutely peculiar conditions, and the fateful role played by them in history, all this points to their particular and mysterious foundations of their destiny. Everyone sees it. It makes no sense. It's contradictory. How can a people so small so play such an outsized role? Who, by the way, pound for pound, I'm not bragging, this is just fact. No people for its size has contributed more to the world than the Jewish people on every level, in terms of ideas and faith and Nobel Prizes and everything else. And no country like Israel, like a little startup nation, yet no people is more hated and hounded and persecuted. And we have to ask ourselves, and we'll get to this in a couple of minutes, and it has everything to do with what happened on October 7th and the world's reaction. What is the thing that we are doing that is so threatening to people, that people over and over again feel they have to wipe every single one of us off the face of the earth? It's an obvious question we should be asking. So we'll get to it. But just one more quote from one person who appreciates how wild our history is. Famous American author Mark Twain, whose real name is Samuel Clemens, who not only is a famous author of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, but he has 7 patents for the elastic in suspenders. And if that's ever on a game show and someone wins like $5 million, I want half. But what does Mark Twain say? Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of, but he is heard of, has always been heard of. His contributions to the world's list of great names are way out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in this world in all ages and has done it with his hands tied behind him. And he goes on to say, all things are mortal, but the Jew, all other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? And it has everything to do with this unique role we play in human history. And we've been on a real roller coaster ride. You ever heard the expression, they won the battles, they won the battles but lost the war? We lost almost all the battles, if you know your Jewish history, but we won the war. Now what war, okay, the Maccabees, the Hanukkah story, who fought the Greeks to a standstill. It took 25 years and we survived. The Romans, we rebelled 3 times against them and they trashed us. We went into exile for 2,000 years. We got bounced from place to place and pogroms and slaughters and Khmelnytsky massacre and crusades. And what is it? We lost most of the battles, but we won the war. What's the war we won? Survival, but that's just that. But the bigger battle is on terms of ideas, transformative ideas, because what was driving the struggle on the deepest level was from the birth of Abraham to the birth of Christianity. We will exist alone in the world as the only people believing in one God, and everyone is telling us we're crazy and trying to kill us. But look what Judaism has been able to do. This is Seneca. He's a famous Roman philosopher going back 2,000 years ago. He says, this abominable nation, he's talking about us, has succeeded in spreading its customs throughout all the lands. The conquered have given their laws to the conquerors. So even though we were in no position to influence anyone, without a country with no rights, being bounced from place to place, little groups of Jews persecuted, there is no question that hands down, we, the tiny Jewish people, have been the greatest transformative force in human history in terms of ideas and values. And what's the biggest transformation we've had? It's not with Nobel Prizes. It's not with all that stuff. It's that directly and primarily indirectly, we weaned today what are billions of people off a worldview that is polytheistic, to a worldview that basically comes from the idea of one God, one absolute standard of morality, which is Christianity and Islam. But it's not just through faith and religion that we transform the world, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. It's such a fascinating topic that a lot more is coming out on now, that the creation of what we call modern liberal democracy is not a byproduct of the Western world weaning itself through the Enlightenment off of religion and pushing the church aside. It's through the rediscovery by early modern thinkers, people like John Locke, Hugo Grotius, Eric Sell, all the greatest minds of the 17th, 18th century, recognizing that if God is perfect, the system of government he gave the ancient Hebrews has got to be perfect. And if we're looking to transform Europe, beginning in Europe, into a new form of government, why reinvent the world? We can just look at the biblical model. People do not begin to appreciate how much of Judaism is in what we call real Western liberal democracy. But here's one guy who does, the second president of the United States, and the first guy to live in the White House, because George Washington didn't. John Adams. He says, I will insist the Hebrews have done more to civilize men than any other nation. If I were an atheist and believed in blind eternal fate, I should still believe that fate had ordained the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing the nations. If I were an atheist of another sect, I should believe that chance had ordered the Jews to preserve and propagate to all mankind the doctrine of a supreme, intelligent, wise, almighty sovereign of the universe, which I believe to be the great essential principle of all morality and consequently of all civilization. Wow. And if he were running for president today, I would definitely vote for him. Look at what the late great Paul Johnson, historian who wrote the book, The History of the Jews, he says, the Jewish vision became the prototype for many similar grand designs for humanity, both divine and man-made. Perfect. It's the religious view and the modern liberal democratic view. The Jews therefore stand at the center of the perennial attempt to give human life the dignity of purpose. And another fantastic quote from Thomas Cahill, who also wrote the book, The Gift of the Jews. He says, unbelievers might wish to stop for a moment and consider how completely God, this Jewish God of justice and compassion, undergirds all our values, and that it is just possible that human effort without this God is doomed to certain failure. All who share the outrageous dreams of universal brotherhood, peace, justice, who dream the dreams and see the vision of the great prophets, must bring themselves to contemplate the possibility that without God, there is no justice. And this is great stuff that the world doesn't. Actually, there are plenty of people in the world who appreciate this, but you don't hear them speaking so much as you hear the other side yelling and screaming about how evil we are. But bottom line is, we're not perfect, but we, the teeny tiny Jewish people who shouldn't even be here, we have civilized the world. Directly or indirectly, we have been absolutely monumentally transformative force. So now that we understand just a quick review here, the purpose of creation is pleasure, highest level pleasure is relationship with God. Humanity blew it. Along comes Abraham, and he chooses for himself and for us this unique responsibility. And the plot of human history is humanity returns to God. Jewish people lead the way. How much time do we have left? How soon do you have to buy that apartment in Jerusalem, which is getting crazy expensive? Forget Netanya. All the French Jews have bought all the apartments there. So it says in a number of places in the Talmud, in the oral law, it says the world is to exist for 6,000 years, which doesn't mean from the Big Bang to the end of the universe. It means from the end of day 6, when God, so to speak, takes off his watch from God time and says, okay, you human beings down on earth, start keeping time from a day, the earth revolving once on its axis. For the end of normative history is going to be a maximum of 6,000 years. What does the 6 come from? Where's the 6 come from in 6,000 years? Where are we getting it from? Besides the number of times at a wedding or a bar mitzvah, you go to the smorgasbord before you go for dessert. 6 days of creation. Yeah, exactly. And then the Talmud subdivides. So the first 2,000 years were desolation. The 2,000 years, the Torah flourished. The next 2,000 years are the Messianic era. But through our many iniquities, all these years have been lost. So let's see our little timeline laid out here. So here's the 6,000. By the way, the 6 days of the week that we use today, not only are they based on the 6 days of creation, and Jewish weeks begin on what day of the week? Sunday, which we don't call Sunday in Israel. Those are pagan god names. Sunday, Moon Day, right? Who's Tuesday, by the way? That's the Norse god of war. Woden's Day, Odin. Thor's Day, Freya's Day. Now you know all these things important. But we say Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. We're counting up. So too, we're told that every single day of creation is equivalent to a millennia, 1,000 years of human history. And it's subdivided into 3 huge periods of time. The first 2,000 years, which basically goes from creation to Abraham, is called desolation, borrowing from the second sentence in Genesis of the nothingness that exists before God creates the world. Here it means no relationship with God. From Adam through the flood and all that stuff, the world loses the plot, so to speak. The next 2,000 years from Adam to the year 200 of the Common Era is all of Jewish national history in the land of Israel. When we exist, the hardware, the Jewish people with their unique software, the Torah as the nation that's a light to nations, the Torah flourishing. The last 2,000 years is not the Messianic era per se, but rather the period of time when humanity returns to God. Jewish people lead the way. And by the way, if you lay this map over what really happens, that is what happened. From Abraham until the birth of Christianity, we'll exist alone in the world as the only people believing in one God. And in the last 1,800 years, because we're not at the end yet, we've seen the greatest, as we saw already, spiritual and moral transformation in human history with the advent of Christianity and Islam. But I want to focus on the last period of time, because that's the period of time we're in now, this section here, which is called Mashiach. And this is divided into 2 parts. There's normative history, and there's a transitional part at the end. Before we enter the 7th day of creation, which is not on we haven't seen that yet. There's like you have on Friday night, when the sun goes down, but the stars haven't come out, it's twilight. That's when you do Kabbalat Shabbat, right? Not yet Shabbat, but it's on the way. The Kabbalat Shabbat of human history is called the Messianic era. It's amazing how many Jews, by the way, don't think this is a Jewish idea. Is that a Christian concept? Christianity stole the idea from us, changed the definition, used it against us, and don't pay us any royalties for it. But Messiah is a Jewish idea. He is a person who is a catalyst. What does a catalyst do in chemistry? Speeds up the process. His job, not to go into, we'll have a whole class just on that, but his job is he has the leadership ability, the spiritual connection, the Torah knowledge to prepare not just the Jewish people, but the whole world to enter the Sabbath of human history, which is called Olam Haba, which translates to the world to come, which is not where you go when you're dead. That's Olam HaNeshamot. That's the soul world. Olam Haba is when the world goes back to the way it was before Adam ate from the tree and everything got messed up. You've heard of these concepts, resurrection of the dead and final judgment? That takes place then. I'm not going to talk about that now. But Maimonides, the great medieval Jewish scholar, who was born in 1135 and died in 1205, he says, let no one think that the days of the Messiah, any of the laws of nature will be set aside, or any innovations will be introduced into creation. The world will follow its normal course. In that era, there will be neither famine nor war, neither jealousy nor strife. Blessings will be abundant, comforts within reach of all. The one preoccupation will be to know the Lord. The world lines up behind the Jewish people, stops pushing back against us and fighting, and says, show us how to connect to God and get back to the purpose of creation. So now you can see the entire thing laid out over there. Okay, so let's keep going forward here. There we are. So now we can see the entire timeline, Shabbat Olam Haba. So this is when you get to the year 6000, you're already into the 7th millennia. And we'll see in a minute, we're getting pretty close. We're definitely approaching what we say is the finish line of our story, and I'll tell you exactly where we are in a minute. But the problem when you approach the finish line is what? You ever seen these? I've seen a couple times these YouTube videos where the guy's like way ahead, and like he just slows down because he's walking, and then some guy races by him and wins the race. What's the famous Aesop's fable about that one? The tortoise and the hare. Okay, you can't get complacent when the finish line is close. The opposite, as a matter of fact. Speaking of that, Aesop says it perfectly. Here he is himself. Do not let your special character and values, the secret that you know that no one else does, the truth, don't let that get swallowed up by the great chewing complacency. Because as we know, if you're familiar with the great Hollywood epics, and I'm kind of obsessed with these movies, and I noticed the last book I wrote, which is called Destiny, is based on the Hollywood movie epic. Take any of these movies you recognize, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, The Matrix, Star Wars, any of them. You notice it's called The Hero's Journey, the story beats in a movie. Pick one of these stories you see. There's always a little superhero, right? Whether it's Luke Skywalker, Harry Potter, or Frodo Baggins, who doesn't even know he's the hero, right? But he's thrust into a narrative he didn't choose to be, doesn't even want to be there, but he plays a much more important role than he even realizes most of the time. And he's always facing what? Darth Vader, Saruman, Voldemort, some big bad guy who's always in black. By the way, evil in real life doesn't dress in black and look evil. Evil looks just like you and I and always thinks it's saving the world, but that's a separate discussion. And he should have lost multiple times because the other guy's so much more powerful. He has a series of encounters, some of which he barely survives. All of his strengths come out, and what always happens at the end? There's a final showdown where the evil is destroyed, good wins, and the balance is restored. Why is that? Why are all the movies like that? Because we know that's the way the story really is. And the reason I wrote that book was to illustrate that the story beats of Jewish history, we are the real protagonist and what is the real drama here. Take every one of the story beats, you see that is our story. But the problem is that when you approach the finish line, that is the greatest danger. And that's the period of time we're in. And the time we have left, I want to focus on what does the Torah, what do the rabbis say about what we should expect to see? And this will cue us into how close are we really to the end. Now, I want to begin with a great quote from one of the great European rabbis, who was Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman, who was murdered by the Nazis in 1941. He never lived to see the birth of the State of Israel. Remember, it's 1941. He never even lived to see the height of the Holocaust and the final solution introduced in 1942. But in his book, Ichvasa de Mashiach, which is the heel of the Messiah, he says, if we wish to comprehend the nature of events in our lives, we must seek out those verses and teachings of the rabbis which relate to the period preceding the Messiah. That is the transitional period between the end of the exile and the redemption. If we compare what is written to the events taking place, we will see a mirror image of everything that is happening to us. Everything mentioned in the Torah becomes concrete fact, and conversely, nothing is happening that was not predicted by the Torah in advance. So he's saying, just look, it's all there, and now I want to show you, and some of these things are pretty wild. So the first thing I want to show you is a quote from Rabbi Chaim Vital. Chaim Vital, who's heard of Rabbi Isaac Luria? Who's been to Sfat? Okay, so Sfat is the Kabbalah capital of Israel until today, but going back to 500 years ago, after the expulsion from Spain, it was the largest Jewish community, and you had all these great Jewish mystics. Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, Rabbi Isaac Luria showed up there. Rabbi Isaac Luria is one of the most transformative thinkers in Kabbalah and Jewish metaphysics. And his main student, he wrote nothing, his main student, Chaim Vital, recorded the teachings of his rabbi, Rabbi Isaac Luria, and he says, at the end of days, Israel is destined to experience the Ishmaelite exile. This fifth and last exile will be the most difficult of all. It is the exile of Ishmael. Now, a little background to this. What do you mean the fifth and last exile? We only had two physical exiles. We had one under the Babylonians. We had one under the Romans. These are not literal exiles. If you look at the book of Daniel, which is probably the hardest book in the Bible to read, it's very esoteric and half in Aramaic. He talks about the four great ancient oppressors of the Jewish people, which were whom? Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. That's how the rabbis interpret what Daniel is seeing. So what we're being told is an idea that's brought out by the great Jewish mystical thinkers of 500 years ago. There's a fifth guy coming, and this is the Ishmaelite exile. Who's Ishmael, by the way? Who is Ishmael? He is Abraham's firstborn son through his second wife, Hagar, who's an Egyptian princess. Remember, Abraham had two wives. What's that called? Polygamy. What's the punishment for polygamy? Two mothers-in-law. Just joking. But he doesn't become the Jewish people because he doesn't have the right stuff, because Sarah's not his mother. It's Hagar. But what does he become, by the way? The Arabs. And what's the offshoot faith that comes out of the Arabs, even though 70% of those Muslims are not Arab today? What's the largest Islamic nation in the world? Some people think it's France. Give it a few years, it will be. Indonesia. Very good. 10 bonus points. Indonesia. And by the way, India, which is a Hindu country, India's Muslim minority is 400 million people. That's the Muslim minority of India. It's twice the size of Pakistan, which is the Muslim country created for the Muslims. Anyway, let's not get into that stuff. But Arabs and Islam come from Ishmael, and we're told that the final oppressor is going to be the Islamic/Arabs. Oppression of the Jewish people. That's the last one that's going to come. Look what it says now. Now you guys heard of the concept of Gog and Magog? This is some scary stuff. This is from Ezekiel and Zechariah. And this is talking about a final showdown at the end of days when the nations of the world make one final attempt to stop us from getting our act together physically and spiritually. Like we backed them into the corner. You ever seen those Animal Channel shows when the baboon is about to be killed by the lion? That's when it's most dangerous because it knows it's its last chance to save its life. It's going to go all out. So this is called Gog and Magog. We're not sure who Gog and Magog and all this rabbinic commentary. We can't even begin to go into it. But look at what Zechariah says about it. He says, the prophecy of the word of Hashem, God, concerning Israel. Behold, I am making Jerusalem a cup of poison for all the peoples all around. And all the nations of the world will gather against it. That the world is going to obsessively focus on Jerusalem. So look at what, you guys know the Zohar? So the Zohar is the most basic book of Jewish mysticism. It's a very esoteric, mystical commentary on the 5 books of Moses. It's written in Aramaic. Authorship is attributed to another fantastic mystical thinker, whose name is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Rashbi. And he lived 2,000 years ago, basically. And he, in the Zohar, in Parshat Bereshit, in the book of Genesis, it says, the children of Ishmael are destined at that time, meaning at the end of days, when we approach the Messianic era, to incite all the nations of the world to come to Jerusalem together with them, as is written in Zechariah, I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem for war. Now, there's another great mystical thinker from Sfat going back 500 years ago, was Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who, by the way, Rabbi Isaac Luria came to study from, who's actually from, Cordovero comes from Cordoba in Spain, but he was actually born in Jerusalem. But look what he writes 500 years ago. This is amazing. He's saying that 500 years ago, all the nations will ready themselves against Jerusalem and make peace amongst themselves. They will turn against Israel to annihilate it for having established its own government. It will be a time of distress for Jacob, yet they will not collapse but be saved from their distress. Whoa. As we get close, they're going to try and stop us. They're freaking out. And we see that's exactly what is going on. And by the way, you notice that if you look at the charts on explosions of anti-Semitism, this doesn't even include the last year. But if you notice what is here, this is 2009, 2014. These are explosions in anti-Semitism around the world. What are they corresponding to? What happened in 2009? What happened in 2014? Israel, Gaza wars. The final expression is, you notice, like, Israel's at war with the people who's trying to kill us, and they're beating up people in restaurants in LA and Pico. Or calling for Jews to be, gas the Jews at the Sydney Opera House. So what you're seeing here is something that's really, really important to understand, because we can't get distracted by the misreporting about the genocide that Israel is perpetrating against the Palestinians, all that other stuff. You see, and by the way, it's really wild that the one thing that the world, radical Islam doesn't have a lot in common with Europe, except that they're taking it over demographically. But what's the one thing they agree on? You know, like you ever heard that, queers for Palestine? Come on, that's like chickens for KFC. It's the craziest idea in the world. There's actually accused Israel of pinkwashing, because Israel, is rated as one of the two most LGBTQ friendly places in the world, Tel Aviv. So what do the Queers for Palestine say? Israel hides behind its tolerance for the LGBT community to mask its genocidal policies towards the Palestinians, because clearly queers in Iran would do very, very well. But you see these are pictures, these are Europeans, and this is not from this last year, by the way. This is I've collected these images over a period of time. Taking a swastika, 6 lines of a Jewish star, making it into a swastika. Look at this. Hitler, you were right. What's going on here? What's the one thing that the European leftists and the American left, this is the Green Red Alliance it's called, that you see in the world, and radical Islam have in common? They actually hate the Jewish state. Most of the radical left they're just not even understanding what's really going on. But you see that it's being led by the Islamic world, this radical Islamic jihadist idea that is very threatening not just to the Jews, but to the entire world. But the point we have to take away from ourselves is Israel bashing is the final excuse that anti-Semitism is hiding behind. Anti-Semitism always hides behind an excuse, and we make a terrible mistake by focusing on that, thinking if we fix that, it will go away. It's like a doctor, you have like some sore on your hand, but you got some really bad disease in your body. You're putting cream on here, but you're ignoring the real disease. So just to focus on what is a huge topic in just a couple of minutes, let's try and understand, since anti-Semitism in America is up 360% since a year ago. Do you know that? In England, it's absolutely out of control. In Germany, those are the two most dangerous places in Europe, in Western Europe, by the way. England is the number one. Explosion of anti-Semitism. So without doing the whole presentation I have, which you can go to my website and do in an hour, which is called Why the Jews, which is well worth watching. For free, you can watch it on my website. But I just want to show you one person. And sometimes the people that hate us the most get us the best. Who's the greatest Jew hater of the last 100 years? Hitler. Now, I know people say, how can you quote Hitler talking about Jews? Like you're walking down a street in the South 70 years ago and you see a guy with a white hood with 2 eye holes. What do you think of black people? Like you're going to take his opinion seriously, like a Klanman? So most people who believe stupid things about us. But sometimes the people that hate us the most get us the best. And the fact that Hitler embarks on what is mechanized mass murder of an entire people shows that just look what he says about us, and you tell me if he's giving us some hint as to what's really going on, all the smoke screens aside. He says the 10 Commandments have lost their validity. Conscience is a Jewish invention. It is a blemish like circumcision. That is the single greatest backhanded compliment ever given to the Jewish people. What's a backhanded compliment? You're trying to insult someone, and you give them a compliment. Conscience is a Jewish invention. Forget what Hitler quotes. Look at the words of the Hitler Youth song. How this is not in Yad Vashem on the walls is mind-blowing to me. I'm going to show you 2 versions. You know the Hitler Youth? All the kids in Germany joined this. Of course, they sound much better in German, but look at the translations of these songs. It's unbelievable. It's saying the quiet part out loud. We are the joyous Hitler Youth. We don't need any Christian virtue. Our leader is our savior. The Pope and Rabbi shall be gone. We want to be pagans once again. Look at the next one. This is even more unbelievable. Jews out, away with the Pope. No, we have not bled anonymously without fame. So the German race will be Judaized through Christianity again. We are free from the mountain of Sinai. You leave us alone. This is unbelievable. No one talks about this. We have been dragging the world off and kicking and screaming towards a vision of values, like I said at the beginning, based on one God and one absolute standard of morality, and anti-Semitism, regardless of what excuse it hides behind, even though millions of people might believe those stupid excuses, on the deepest level, is always pushback, very violent sometimes, against the national historic mission of the Jewish people to bring humanity back to what I talked about at the beginning of this class, which is the relationship with God. And even if we forget our mission, the people who really understand who we are and know we have it in our soul, they don't care. You ever notice the people who hate us don't care what kind of Jew you are? Orthodox, conservative, Reform, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, like Auschwitz, they had different lines? No, there's only one line. The people who hate us look at us as one people. By the way, it's a big lesson. We have to learn to do the same thing. Abraham Joshua Heschel was a big thinker in the conservative movement. He had a great quote. He said, the Jewish people are messengers who forgot the message. But the people who hate us know that we carry the message in our soul, often very much pushed down there. But the real problem, my friends, if we put this all together, because we're coming to the end here, if we understand we have a unique mission, if the world is not going in the right direction, what's the Jewish understanding? Who is really responsible for that? We are. We are. If we don't get the job done, the world's not going to get in the right direction. It's going to go the opposite direction. There's a Jewish thinker from the mid-20th century. His name was Will Herberg. And he hit on one of the most profound ideas. And he's saying this 70 years ago. And today, oh my God, he was very prescient. He saw it coming. It's called the cut flower ethics. This quote is unbelievably profound. He said, the attempt made in recent decades by secularist thinkers to disengage the moral principles of Western civilization from their scripturally based religious context in the assurance that they could live a life of their own as, quote, humanistic, unquote, ethics has resulted in our cut flower culture. Cut flowers retain their original beauty and fragrance, but only so long as they retain the vitality they have drawn from their now severed roots. After that is exhausted, they wither and die. So with the freedoms, brotherhood, justice, and personal dignity. The values that form the moral foundations of our civilization. Without the life-giving power of faith out of which they have sprung, they possess neither meaning nor vitality. Wow. If you understand everything we talked about until now, that Western liberal values come from the ideas that we, the Jews, brought into the world, that were spread through Christianity and created modern liberal democracy. By the way, if the Holocaust proves anything, it's the failure of Western liberal democracy to create. Look what it did. People ask, where's God? I said, where's man? But when you take God out of it, as you know, the person who said it the best was the British writer G.K. Chesterton. When man stopped believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. And when the world gets back to that, you're in a very dangerous situation. And you know who becomes the person who's most hated? The person who says, I don't believe in everything. It's unbelievable. The person says, I know this is right and this is wrong. He becomes public enemy number one. But because we, the Jewish people, have largely lost sight of the mission, the world is kind of acting like a rudderless ship. And look at how much the world is. Everyone sees in the world how much the world is split in politics in America, how dysfunctional has become. In Israel, you see the same thing. Right before October 7th, what was going on in Israel? For those who follow Israeli politics, the country was literally ripping itself apart in a way I've never seen, and I've been there like 42 years. And the point is, and this is so important. You know, people ask, how do you explain anti-Semitism? Bottom line, Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, a great European rabbi going back 200 years ago, he has one sentence that says it perfectly. And we should put this on a refrigerator. Not about you, but all the wisest wisdom in my house is always in my refrigerator. The magnets. When Jews don't make Kiddush, Gentiles make Havdalah. That's it. That is the one sentence explanation ultimately for all of anti-Semitism. Everyone know what Kiddush and Havdalah are? I'm talking about the rituals we make on Friday, and both are made with wine. Kiddush is when you come lower level 6 days of the week, you go to the higher spiritual level of Shabbat, which is synonymous with elevating creation. Havdalah is the end of Shabbat. What do? On a cup of wine, go down. I always get depressed at the end. I got to look at my phone again. I like Shabbat. It's unbelievable. But it doesn't mean literally. When we do not do Kiddush Hashem that I talked about before, we do not live and act as Jews in a proactive way, being good role models for the world, and fill the world with the values that came from God, which have transformed humanity. You know the law of physics? Nature abhors a vacuum. It's a basic law of physics. The world is going to be full of one of two kinds of values. The values that we put into the world are the other values. The other values are what? Evil. And when it comes into the world, who's it going to target? Us first, and you can test it like gravity. The point being, if we don't make truth our target, humanity is going to make the Jewish people and the Jewish state their target. All of this, my friends, is a huge wake-up call that it's enough is enough. The big guy upstairs wants the show to end, and he's calling us to wake up. And it's amazing how many Jews, you guys are all connected, you're here. It's amazing how many Jews who are walking around in the days barely connected are suddenly being attacked because they're Jewish. What did I do? I'm not pro-Israel. No, the people who come, they're going to come after us, whether you're religious, not religious, Zionist, not Zionist. And by the way, the defining issue, as George Gilder, anyone know George Gilder, the book, The Israel Test? This is a must-own book. He's not Jewish. He said the defining issue in the world is basically how you look at Israel. Show me what a country thinks of Israel, I'll tell you all about their values. You think it's an accident that, you know, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, they hate Israel? When evil comes into the world, it targets Jews. And the Jew amongst the nations is the Jewish state. That's why I plopped Israel right in the middle there. It's unbelievable. You'll see, this is the way it works. I just want to show you one more really interesting piece of prophecy, which is not from the written Torah, it's from the Mishnah. You guys know what the Mishnah is? The Mishnah is the oral law. It's a legal document, but in the tractate called Sota, in the 9th parak, the 9th chapter, is something that is so interesting. This is the only place in the Mishnah where the Mishnah just digresses into what we're going to see as we approach the end of days. And it says, and the more you read this, and it's all become in the last year so clear. In the times of the approach of the Messiah, impotence will increase and high costs will pile up. Inflation, okay? Although the vine shall bring forth its fruit, wine nevertheless will be expensive. This is wild because this is counterintuitive, because according to the laws of supply and demand, you have more of something, the price goes down, but that didn't take into consideration with something we have today called modern monetary policy. If you print too much money, what happens? The prices go up anyway, even if you have an excess. And the monarchy shall be turned to heresy. We're talking about Washington again. And there will be no one to give reproof about this. The meeting place of the sages will become a place of promiscuity. And the Galilee shall be destroyed and the Gavlan desolate. The whole northern part of the country is going to be empty. And the men of the border shall go around from city to city seeking charity but find no mercy. And the wisdom of the scribes will putrefy, and people who fear sin will be held in disgust. And truth will be absent. And if you know your Hebrew, the word eder is the root of this, how it's used. Absent, there's many different words for absent, but this comes from the word flock, like a flock of animals. And the rabbis say, in the end of days, the world's going to split into two flocks of animals that will be so different from each other, will have nothing in common. Complete divide down the middle. The youth will shame the face of the elders. Elders will stand before the minors. Normal family relations will be ruined. The son will disgrace the father. A father will rise up against the mother. The daughter-in-law against the mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own house. The face of the generation will be like the face of a dog, which the rabbis say a dog walks before the master. The face of the generation means leadership, the leaders of the world. A dog walks before the master, and the fool thinks the dog leads, but the dog's on a leash and looks back to see which way the master is going to go. So too, at the end of days, there's not going to be any leadership anymore. The son will no longer be ashamed before his father. Upon what is there for us to rely? Only upon our Father in heaven. So to come to a close, my friends, like, where are we in our story? So, by the way, what year did we just enter? Sorry? 6,000 is the max. Okay, Messiah. Now remember, Messiah. Not that 6,000 is the end of the whole story. The Messiah has to come and complete the job by the year 6,000. He doesn't show up then. It's to be done by then. And someone always wants to ask, and what if he doesn't come by then? I always say the same thing. Ask for your money back. But 6,000, where are we? What year did we just enter? 5,700. Okay, that 5,785. Okay, if we get to 5,000, what day of the week are we in? Friday. Because you get to 6,000, you're in Saturday. You're in Shabbat already. You're in Olam Haba, the world to come. 5,500, since Jewish days begin at night, is halfway through the hours of the day. 5,750, 3/4 of the way through the day. 5,785, where are we? You and I, not in fantasy land in Hollywood, but in the real story. We are late Friday afternoon. This is the time in a Jewish home, like Murphy's Law. The chance of the bread falling butter side down is directly proportional to the price of the carpet and those important laws of reality. What's Murphy's Law of Shabbat? Even if you start making your cholent and plucking your chicken on Sunday morning in June, when Shabbat comes in on Friday night at 9 p.m., what are you still doing a half hour before candlelighting? Running around like a chicken with your head cut off. Everything speeds up and gets really intense as we approach the end. So too, as we get to the end of the story, and we're late Friday afternoon, things get really intense. There's a maximum of 215 years. That is a maximum. I don't want to go into this now because we've already gone too long, but there are Jewish sources that indicate that you can lop 200 off the 215. That the whole thing is over literally very soon. Lambs lying down with lions, making soya barbecues, the UN getting together 15 times a day to pass pro-Israel resolutions, the mullahs in Iran coming to do sponge on your floor in Jerusalem. By the way, I do not need any Jewish sources to tell me we don't have 250 years on. I don't need Greta Thunberg yelling at me, I'm destroying the world either. But look at what's going on in the world. Does anyone think we got 250 years to get our act together? The Chafetz Chaim, one of the great Jewish thinkers again of the mid-20th century, this is our last big quote here. In his book, Shem Olam, he says, the entire period of diaspora is like a pregnancy, and the end of exile will be like the pangs of childbirth. This is what the Talmud and Shabbat called Hevle HaMashiach, the birth pangs, actually the word they use, is contractions of the Messiah. As our sages said, if you see suffering increasing and threatening to drown you like a river, expect him. And I don't know, but again, I live in Israel, and people are just sitting there going, God, how much more of this can we take? Like, how much more will we have to go through? It's been such an incredibly difficult year. But again, we don't know the exact date. As a matter of fact, the Zohar, that basic book of Jewish mysticism, says it's not God's will that the date of the Messiah's arrival will be revealed to man, but when the date draws near, even children will be able to make the calculation. And my friends, again, I said I don't know the date, but it's getting pretty clear that we're getting very, very close to it. And as weird and wild as this seems, trust me, it is really happening. I know it sounds like this is so supernatural, but that's the way it is. So what do we do just to close? So number one is, don't panic. Okay, no, seriously, don't panic. The Jews, like Mark Twain said, the Jews saw them all, beat them all. He said the Egyptian, the Babylonian, the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they're gone. We've outlasted all of them. Doesn't mean be complacent, but don't panic. I saw someone saying, some of the New York Times said, we don't know what's going to be in the headlines in 200 years, but there'll be a woman lighting Shabbos candles. That's exactly the point. And this is so important, I made a t-shirt out of it. Here's my t-shirt, it's right here. I even have the real one right here. You got to have a clothing line, not just print, not just do books. And it says, you can see it over there, but it says civilizations, nations, and empires that have tried to destroy the Jewish people and their status today. And this is the short list, because you need 2 shirts for the full list. Ancient Egypt, gone. Philistines, gone. Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine empires, gone. Crusaders, gone. Spanish Empire, gone. Nazi Germany, gone. Soviet Union, gone. Iran with 3 question marks. By the way, in the last war, someone took my shirt and photoshopped in here, Hamas, and wrote, in progress. And it says, the Jewish people, the smallest of nations, with a friend in the highest of places, so be nice. What do you think? 1 for every member of the General Assembly and 2 for the mullahs in Iran? By the way, most Jews are afraid to buy this shirt. Like, I can't wear it, don't kill me. I said, who? A Babylonian? He's gone. Just don't wear it in Iran. Who do you think buys and wears all these shirts? I sell like hundreds of them this year. Evangelical Christians. They don't know Hebrew, but they know the Bible better than almost every Jew. And they see what's going on, the rebirth of Israel, survival of the Jewish people, reunification, 1967. They're always writing me on my Facebook and Instagram, Rabbi Spiro, I live in Yazoo, Mississippi, and I wear your t-shirt in my church because God loves the Jewish people. Because they see what we don't often see, because they're outside of it, and they see everything either coming true or in the process of coming true, but we cannot be complacent. We will survive this, guys. But just a little bit of a call to action to end with. Number 1 is we have to be awake. Philip Dick, who wrote the book The Man in the High Castle, it's funny coming from a science fiction author, but it's a great line. Reality is what continues to exist whether you believe it or not. You can ignore this and go to sleep, but like gravity, you ignore it, the consequences could be negative. Number 2 is, be truth seekers. My Rosh Hashiva, Rabbi Noah Weinberg, the founder of Esher Torah, used to say the battle for life is the battle for sanity. It's a struggle throughout our entire life to live in reality and not go to sleep, to keep the finish line and the goal of who we are as individuals and nation always in front of us. You've got to be educated because you can't represent the Jewish people until you know what the Jewish people represents. Ignorance is far more dangerous to us than anti-Semitism. The Jewish people are literally committing demographic suicide because so few Jews are connected to the Jews. Be balanced. This is huge. Like, it's funny. The progressive Jewish world, which is an Orthodox world, is obsessed with all the stuff, Ben Adam the Havero, like social justice stuff. And the Orthodox Jewish world is becoming overly obsessed with relationship with God. How kosher can I keep? How modestly can I dress? You got to be balanced as an individual. We have to be balanced as a people. We have to be twice as careful what comes out of our mouth as what we put in our mouth. This is so important today. And if we're balanced, the world will be more balanced. We have to be united. Like I said, we're all part of one family. We do not all have to. Anyone who's teenagers gets the point. You don't always like your kids, but you always love them, which is why you allow them to live to maturity so they can produce grandchildren. No, we don't have to agree with your fellow Jew, but you're my brother, you're my sister, I got to love you. Okay, that's the way it works. We have to do this. We have to make a paradigm shift to focus on what unites us and not what divides us. Okay, we have to be focused. We must strive to be aware and focus on our unique responsibility as a people. Like I said, being Jewish might not be comfortable. It's always meaningful, but we should be thanking God. We say this every morning in our prayers. Ashreinu matov halkeinu. Happy are we, how good is our lot. How lucky are we to be the people who have the ability and the wisdom and the system that we got from the big guy upstairs to be the most transformative force in the world. And God knows the world needs us now more than ever. Jews for Judaism make incredible role models for the human race. We have to be proactive. We must constantly look for ways to inspire others by being good role models. First rule I always tell religious Jews is first do no harm. You're wearing a kippah, you're identifiable as a religious Jew, you make sure you're not like embarrassing someone, humiliating them, doing something negative. And then look for ways to be a decent human being, but be a really good Jew. That's the Kiddush Hashem. Because as we say, Each of us doing small things is a great line. Trifles make perfection, but perfection is no trifle. Each of us doing little things can make a big difference. We don't have to be Abraham to transform the world. It's all of us being unified, proactive together. And then we do that. And it's not impossible, by the way. If you're sitting here today as a Jew, like I said, with Israel reborn, by the way, in the year 1900, what percentage of Jews in the world lived in Israel? 0.5%. Today, half the Jews in the world live in Israel. In 1900, one person spoke Hebrew as their first language, Eliezer ben Yehuda's son. Now, Hebrew is spoken by an estimated 10 million Jews in the world. It's the number one language spoken by Jews, and it's like at least 7 million people living in Israel speaking, 9 million now speaking it as their language. It's incredible. So what is seemingly impossible is possible if you have the long view. But just to go back to close from Exodus, what God says to us right before we get the Torah at Mount Sinai, he says, now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine, but you shall be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And let's hope we do that now. We take the wake-up call that we got, and we proactively come together unified as Jews for Judaism. And then we get an end to what's going on of Israel bashing and the anti-Semitism. And then we get peace for ourselves and the whole world. And we should merit to see that soon and in our days. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
That, by the way, those are my books. I do a podcast every week called Remember What's Next about, you can go on Spotify, Anchor, you go to my website, there's my website, Ken Spiro.